Right, a property hotspot's choosing somewhere to invest, at least the term I'm using tonight, is to choose somewhere to invest with a greater likelihood that it's going to perform positively, in other words, go up in value, as opposed to what you don't want it to do, which is to go backwards. So, given that's what a property hotspot's defined as, what's the benefit? Why is it important to secure a property hotspot? Well, number one, if you buy a property investment and it does go up in value, then number one, you feel secure. It's gone up, so you're in the money, so to speak. And you can also put all the naysayers at doubt, those that told you at barbecues you shouldn't do it, now's not the right time, what are you investing in property for? You can at least say, hey, I've invested in property and there's some upside to show for it. Number two, it's obviously very good for your morale. It's better to have an investment that's gone up in value than to have an investment that's gone down in value. It's certainly better to have an investment that's gone up a lot more in value than the average market, and that's what a property hotspot aims to deliver for you. Very important that as it goes up in value, it builds this magic word called equity. Equity that people like myself, Daniel and others in this room would encourage you to use again and perhaps again in another investment property. Not cross-collateralising it, as Daniel's pointed out, but utilising that equity to enable you to get another foothold into the property market. And that all comes about by enabling you to leverage. In other words, borrowing with that equity to utilise it to control another asset, which hopefully is in a hotspot, goes up in value, and then the game repeats itself. So, a couple of years ago, at a function very similar to this, the area we were promoting was an area called Woodvale. Woodvale, it was going to cost you around about 520,000 to secure that investment, but we felt it was an investment that would perform pretty well for you. As it turned out, a couple of years later, that investment did perform well and was valued at $110,000. So that's $110,000 worth of capital gain for that particular investor. Now, a lot of us get fixated on the number, $110,000. What a great investment. I could do a lot with $110,000. And yes, you could. But perhaps the right way to look at it is how much money earned you $110,000. So, in that situation, to have secured that property at Woodvale, it would have required a $40,000 deposit. If you had a $40,000 deposit and you placed it into that investment, or you had equity contributing to allow you to liberate a $40,000 deposit, and you placed it into the Woodvale investment and it went up $110,000, then your return on investment is 275%. Seems a big number, but I checked it with my most numeric staff member and it's for real. If you could make $40,000, generate $110,000, that's the return you would get. And let's say from that $110,000 you could borrow again, and you can, and depending on how the bank appetite is travelling for investment at the particular time, 110 grand would quite comfortably allow you to use 30 of it as a deposit for another investment property. And let's presume you put it into another investment property that we were highlighting, and we were highlighting the Wellard area. We particularly liked Wellard, I'll explain why in a little while, but we particularly liked that as an area. And guess what? As luck would have it, the Wellard area performed and that property has gone up $80,000 in capital gain. So now what we've got is a situation where your first $40,000 deposit yielded you equity of $110,000 at Woodvale and then equity of $80,000 at Wellard, and your return on investment is 475%. Sounds a little too good to be true, but can be achieved. And can be achieved quite safely with quite conservative tactics. And so we pose the question, is that return better than the share market? Not sure. Depends what you've invested in. Is it better than putting equity into your own business? Not sure. If you're like a mate of mine who put his money into an online boutique, this has probably given a better return. But probably more importantly, is it a return better than just leaving it sitting in the bank? Or is it a better return than doing nothing and just feeling safe and secure that you might have money sitting in the bank, when arguably, using it conservatively, you might be able to get yourself a pretty good return on investment? So really the presentation, which is how do you find property hotspots, imagine if you could create them rather than find them. What if you had the power to create property hotspots? If you could create them, then you could get that return on investment day in, day out, week in, week out, just depending on what you chose and where you chose to create them. And so that's what we'd like to sort of spin the jargon a little tonight, because that's what we do. That's what we spend all day, every day in at Investor Assist, is not finding property hotspots. It's pretty difficult because you don't really know where an area is a property hotspot until 6 months later when it becomes a hotspot. But what we spend most of our time in is trying to create property hotspots. So these are the three techniques that we use to create property hotspots. Sometimes you can get the whole three together in one spot and it becomes an Uber hotspot, but most times it's one or two of the factors that we can put together to try and create one for you and in particular your investment. So number one is looking at major land estates. We really do like major land estates. And by a major land estate, I'm referring to the Satterleys, even the ABN groups, the Stocklands, the Peets, and so forth of this world, who go out there, claim an old poultry farm or an old vineyard or an old market garden, normally give it a lavish name, put a bit of an entry statement in the front of it. I think you get the hang of what I'm talking about. They create lots of lands, generally in the order of 50s to hundreds, and they sell them to the public, and the public build houses. And eventually, that land runs out. Well, they tend to follow three stages. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3. In Stage 1, it's the first roads, it's the entry park, it's the basic amenity. In Stage 2, the schools start to come along because there's a population that can support it. There's some shopping, there's some recreation facilities, some amenities and public transport. And then ultimately, the land subdivision is complete, and that's when you see living alternatives, and you'll get the finishing parks. If there's any employment that's likely, that will occur. Public transport is completed at this point. The path for the bikeways actually get somewhere, and it's fully integrated in terms of cycle and walkways and all that's required for the blocks to be completely built out on, and then it's at its zenith. Who'd like to put their hand up and share with me when you're likely to buy the cheapest block of land? Hands up if you think it might be in Stage 1. Very good. Why? Well, the motivation for the developer at that point in time is really to get money back to start to pay the banks off so they can get into the juice of it. And when do you think the most expensive blocks of land are likely to be on availability? Stage 3. And I can tell you, if you're starting to get to, they become smaller and smaller lots, generally group housing sites, but the dollar per square metre is around about the same as what the larger lots were for. And in terms of what you're paying for, you're actually getting better value for money the longer you go because there's more amenities there. So property investors, we don't urge them to get into Stage 1 even though it's the cheapest time. Why would that be? Sorry? Very difficult to get a return, yes. In Stage 1, if all you've got is a road, a park and an amenity, pretty hard to get someone to be your joint venture partner, a tenant, and rent the house from you. So you should resist. Cheapest isn't necessarily best. And there are some land subdivisions out there that have never gotten out of Stage 1. They're called stillborn subdivisions. There are some around. They tend to be inland of Mandurah, if you're looking for some. Now, they've been there in Stage 1. They won't call it Stage 1. They'll probably call it marketing number 18B. But in all honesty, it's Stage 1 still. It hasn't progressed. So what we suggest is that's not a good time to buy in. So if you're considering down in that area, inland Mandurah, you'd be better off going slightly to the coast and in something like Golden Bay or perhaps even come up closer to town where some infrastructure is going in, because they've already moved into stage 2 and they're heading towards stage 3. So what we try and do is encourage our investors to get in between those two stages. Stage 3, you're often paying top dollar. But if it's moved into stage 2, then during that period, it's easy to get tenants because there's enough amenity around, and you know there's inbuilt growth coming from the base commodity, which is the land price, because the dollar per square metre will go up as the development moves from 1 to 2, 2 to 3. And if you've got in there at 2 and you're buying your investment property with a 7 to 10 year time horizon, then that time can work for you and can create equity for you. So that's one way to create a property hotspot. The other way to create a property hotspot is to go to what we call the halo effect. Once a property hotspot appears in a magazine, such as this one here, or on TV, or in the newspaper, because they've always talked about the property hotspots, it's too late. It's already publicised, it's out there, people are already paying the top dollar. So if you want to get into the property hotspot when it makes a magazine, you're paying top dollar. So what we like to do is seek the halo effect. In other words, if the magazine's saying Baldivis is a property hotspot, it isn't, but let's say it was, then our job would be to find a suburb that resembles Baldivis, that isn't quite a hotspot as yet, but because it looks and smells and feels the same, the chances are the value will radiate outward to that neighbouring or similar looking estate. And that we like to call the halo effect. Halo effects also occur because of quality infrastructure. One of the things you should do as a property investor is get onto the federal government website, the Better Schools website, and check out which schools are rated the highest, which public schools are rated the highest by the federal government. And I'll guarantee people are gagging to live in that area so that their children can attend that school. So that area, by nature, will always have better rent than an area that's next to a lousy school, low on the list of the federal government website. If you're interested in the government's moves on transport nodes, that's something you should also pay attention to, because when a transport node goes in, property values increase around it. Auburn Grove's about to unveil a brand new train station, and as a consequence, you should be looking at Wandie, Hammond Park, Banjup, because the value of that train station will radiate out to the suburbs that are around it. If you're thinking about the train to Allenbrook, maybe wait on that one. It's been announced 5 times, I think, in different iterations that there's something going to Allenbrook. But if that's your motivation for Allenbrook, you might just want to wait on the definitive nature of the promise or pledge to Allenbrook. The other thing to consider when we're looking at infrastructures is also negative impacts on infrastructure. Go to the website and have a look at the crime statistics of suburbs. Unfortunately, Central Armidale is very high in the crime statistics. There's no coincidence, but there aren't many hotspots right near Central Armidale as yet. Okay, so hotspots can be of a positive, even a negative nature if you're considering this term we like to use as the halo effect. I hope that makes sense to you. Then item number 3, and this is the one that most of my property investment specialists, certainly myself, love working with, because we can do this all day, every day, and it's one of the great advantages of what we have to offer, and that is we can sell you stuff at wholesale. We can help put the components together and create investment properties for you. It's not all we sell, but for 90% of you, we would encourage you to go down the wholesale route, which is buy block and build house, because most of the times we can get you in at below 80% of the median house price. And if you can get in below the median house price, certainly around the 80% mark, well then you've got inbuilt equity just waiting for you to unveil. And if we have a look at that Woodvale example, we'll go back to 2012. You probably can't read that thing there. Some of you can. But in 2012, the median house price for Woodvale was $610,000. All right? The land, we bought the block for the client at $270,000. We placed a fully complete house on it for $250,000. Now, in this environment with low interest rates and throughout the duration, the rent for that property right up until today has averaged $600 a week. So it has not cost the client any more than the original deposit. It's been positively geared during that time. But they got in for $520,000. So remember, the median was $610,000. They could get in for that $520,000, and today's value is $630,000. The median house price has only raised $20,000. We haven't talked about a ballistic market here. We haven't talked about the market going silly. They've got that equity because of putting the components together and putting the components together sensibly. Now, that's using the 80% technique, and it was also using the halo principle technique, because Woodvale is the highest ranked public school in Western Australia. We have clients prepared to rent houses just to get their kids into the Woodvale school. They want to be in that area, and they start planning many years in advance. So if you can get in at around the 80%, and you can have the impact of a strong dominator such as a school, plus it's also very close to the CBD, then it's an asset that will perform for you. And then we'll have a look at the next example, which is the Wellard example, where we also used a number of combinations in putting this together and then citing it as a property hotspot. So you can see that the median house price was $418,000 when we started enunciating Wellard as an opportunity. You could purchase a block of land for $135,000. You could build a home for $205,000, once again complete turnkey. It was one of the homes that Dale showed you, the Port Angeles. Your entry price was $340,000. This too, rented at $400 a week, so it was better than $1 per thousand. So this would have yielded around, it has been yielding around 5.2% during its duration. With interest rates down low, it was only the deposit that was required. This now has a valuation of $420,000. In terms of market movement, $418,000 to $420,000. It's not a ballistic market. The market has not moved. But the equity is there because the equity was created. Okay, so property hotspots exist everywhere. Property hotspots can exist any day of the week if you use one of these three, or in this case, this was 3 of the 3. We got in at under the 80% mark of the median house price. It had a halo effect coming from the train station that was built in Wellard, which had a transit-orientated development around it, and it was in stage 2 of its land development phase. So there's a lot more going on in that Wellard area now. So today's exercise of property hotspots has thrown up these, because these are the areas that we can put together for you. Now, you can do all of this yourself. There's absolutely no drama with that, but it's a lot easier if you've got someone else perhaps doing all the legwork for you. All you need to do is ask the 3 questions. What's it like in terms of land development? What stage is it? Is there a halo effect in play? And then number 3, what's my entry level to get involved in the estate? If you get 2 out of the 3, it's probably a good place to say yes in. If you get 3 out of 3, it's a very good place to say yes in. If it's 1 out of 3, then you have to make a value judgment. But if you haven't asked those 3 questions, you're really just taking a bit of a wish. Now, we can help you with all of those, but you can get a hotspot guide. This is the time you can pull your mobile out and check Facebook at the same time and see what Scott Morrison's offered you. All you have to do is text the word hotspot to that particular number, and that will give you the instructions to get the download from there.